Welcome to the Supply Chain Tech Podcast with Roamby. Scott Mears here, Global Field Marketing Manager at Roamby and one of the hosts of the Supply Chain Tech Podcast. We thank you for joining us today. In this episode, we speak with Ilya Preston. Ilya is the CEO of Paxafe. Today, we discuss how active risk management is evolving the perishable goods industry's approach to risk in supply chains globally. We learn about innovative technology that allows us to predict risk. And we also have an interesting conversation about the challenges solution providers face when trying to enable this technology with their customers. Welcome, Ilya. Thank you for coming on to the podcast today.
Thanks for having me, Scott.
Awesome. I love to always start off with a bit of an icebreaker, and I'm actually quite excited for this question because I've not asked it before, so I'm quite keen to know what you say. I would love to know, if you had a different role in supply chain, what would it be and why?
Yeah, that's an intriguing question. I think for me, at the end of the day, it's I find myself living vicariously through our data and machine learning teams almost daily. And, they're doing some of the most interesting and unbelievable work around supply chain prediction, around risk quantification, around data contextualization. I think at the end of the day, it would probably be a machine learning engineer. I think there's just so much new data, so many new data sources, and unbelievable insights that are still that are still trapped and are not coming to the forefront for companies that invest in supply chain visibility. And I think being a part of that effort to unleash the value of visibility is something that's very intriguing to me. So I think it would have to be, and we have a number of great data scientists and machine learning engineers on the team that come from all walks of life, that, some of them were a part of the last mile data science Amazon team. So they've done some really, really interesting things in the past. And I think what they're working on is contagious. And I find myself struggling to not be a part of every and any meeting that they have, because it's just so interesting.
That's a wonderful answer, and yeah, more and more we're using machine learning, and more it's growing. We're understanding the power it has. So that's really a great insight into you and where you would be placed differently if you weren't CEO of Paxafe. That's really interesting to know. And what I want to know first is, at the start of the podcast, I want to really define between passive and active risk management. So what I want us to do together is, I want us to define and highlight the key differences between the two different approaches of risk management today. So the traditional approach of the passive approach, and with the more adopted approach today, becoming the more adopted approach today, the active risk management. So I want to define what these are and the key differences between these two approaches.
Yeah, so I think the key difference is passive is obviously not real time, right? Active is real time when it pertains to location and condition monitoring. For me personally, when I think about weighing the pros and cons of each, I have no dog in the fight, and Paxafe has no dog in the fight, because we support both active and passive loggers within our platform, device agnostically, right? That being said, I think historically, the calculus of a company trying to determine whether passive or active is the best fit for the lanes has always been very unilateral. It's always been essentially, is this a high criticality product? Is the lead time on this super urgent? Is it a highly sensitive product? And it was almost a binary yes, no amongst those items. And if the answer to the majority of those questions was yes, active and real-time visibility is necessary. If the answer is, this is not that critical a product, it doesn't have an urgent lead time, maybe it doesn't require 24/7 visibility to the customer, then passive may be a better fit. I think that line of thinking, that calculus has evolved over recent years, where companies are now starting to understand some of the value that can be unlocked that's more difficult to quantify and not as apparent. So for example, the ability to automate workflows by using real-time active devices, the ability to build prediction models and actually identify risks before they occur, right? Those are things that are not possible with passive data loggers that are sharing similar data with you, but after the shipment's already been complete, after the shipment has arrived at the destination. Obviously, one of the key differences is the ability to intervene, right, and salvage any product that may be at risk. With passive data loggers, you can't do that. You don't have a real-time feed on location and condition data of the product. So if there are any sort of critical delays, if there are any sort of temperature excursions, you're going to know about them after the fact, but you're not going to be able to salvage the product. The product, it may already be lost. Obviously, with active devices, you have the ability to intervene. You typically have some sort of a control tower that's monitoring these dots on the screen. And once you see that an excursion has occurred, and once you see that, temperature is out of spec, or a product is been sitting at a particular location for 6 hours without movement, you have the option to then jump in, and whatever the intervention process may look like, it may be direct, it may be through the carrier, it may be through the broker or the 3PL. You have the ability to kick off that process and have a chance at salvaging the product. So I think, I think there are a number of things that are impossible to do with passive data loggers as compared to active. But I also think that the calculus towards the decision-making between active and passive is very fast evolving. And I think what used to be a very binary decision between, hey, should I use passive or should I use active, is now a much more nuanced and intentional calculation and consideration. So I think that is very much evolving. And I think, Scott, you and I were both at Logipharma just a few weeks ago. Wow. Before this conference, I don't know that I heard universally from pharmaceutical companies, healthcare companies, that they were 100% on board with a vision to go active, right, for most, if not all, of their lanes. Before this, at least the conferences I had gone to, the discussions that I had, I think there was always this sentiment of, we're going to invest in active, but we're still going to keep X% of our lanes passive. We just don't have the need to go 100% real time across everything. That wasn't the case this last conference, right? I heard universally that we intend in the next 3 to 5 years to be 100% active from a majority of the healthcare organizations that I spoke with. And I think there's a number of contributing factors to that. Obviously, improving device performance, reduced device component cost. I think there are a number of things that are making active more and more attractive to healthcare organizations.
That's a great point. Very much to sum up the difference between those two is, do you want to know a problem has happened before, after it's happened, or do you want to know the problem either it could happen or is happening in that moment, and you can do something about that? It really is that simple between passive and active, and I agree, seeing that change, because I've been to other events in pharma supply chain where there's been a real resistance, as you had mentioned there, to that move to even take 100% of real time, sometimes not to take it on board at all. But I completely agree. It was a real move in this particular, in Logipharma USA, to people really pushing forward and even going down to the level of robotic process automation and automating it to even a high level. So this was really good to see and a great sign for things to come. And what I want to do, because there are still a portion of the industry that and I'm talking now within cold chain, within food and beverage, within pharma, that still have resistance to move from that passive to active. What I want to do before we really jump into how active is changing the game, I want to dive into a few things that comes up quite regularly that create a resistance for that move to happen. So I'm just going to we're going to go through them one by one. And I feel these are just some of the things we hear a lot. I think one which technology companies feel a lot is the impact of buzzwords. I mean, for Roamby, real time. I mean, I even refrain from saying those words in conversations because it's just so loosely used. It's kind of misunderstood a lot of the time. AI, machine learning, these sort of buzzwords. I would love to learn more from your side of how we can overcome this as technology companies to overcome that problem of all these buzzwords creating confusion and miscommunication.
Yeah, that's a great question. So delineating between real time or near real time, for example, is something when you speak to another professional that lives in visibility, they're going to know that nothing is real time every second, right? At least nothing that is economically feasible that can last from an energy budget perspective. So I think when you say real time, and you're dealing with a professional from the industry, they're going to understand that real time could mean anywhere from 5-minute updates, maybe more standard 15-minute updates, but at most an hour, at once an hour, right? But when you're talking to potentially their IT teams or their digital transformation teams that may not have lived in visibility before this, they take that real time to be they take it quite literally. So to your point on generally using these buzzwords and maybe the effect that it has on both the industry and the startup, I think upfront there is an immediate resistance and almost a loss of credibility, because a lot of times we do find that these words are massively overused, right? I could, I've been monitoring the competitive landscape. Even bigger companies do this. They'll say, we're AI enabled and we have all this machine learning capability. And then you go look at their employees and they have no data people, zero, maybe one data analyst, right? That's typically a telltale sign that something isn't adding up. And I find even in my own journey, when we start to speak to somebody fresh and they've already tried somebody who's AI enabled or has machine learning and it flopped, right? It didn't work. That's a loss of credibility for startups, right? So I think it's important to number one, be intentional with the use of those words. Number two, I think it's important to have a standard definition of what they mean. In our particular world, you may have heard PTA, predictive time of arrival, as another one, right? And I don't know how many times I've heard, when we disclose that and share that we have a PTA that's 95% accurate. Well, my carrier can get me a PTA. They've offered me a PTA, right? And then we dig a little bit deeper and we find that it's a carrier promise date, right? Or the intended lead time of the shipment. It's not a PTA at all. And that's come up many, many times. So I think having a standard, almost universal definition of all of this terminology, what it actually means, what would be a net positive for the industry. At the end of the day, in our case, how we kind of overcome this is we're confident in our tech's ability. So we open up our platform and we say, go try it for a month for free. And you can typically very quickly see if it's working or if it's not.
Yeah.
Right? And once they realize that, once our customers realize, oh yeah, this is much better than anything I've tried before, from a capability standpoint, specifically when I'm talking about like AI enabled features, I think that tends to build that credibility back. But to your point, it is a huge barrier at the beginning of the relationship. And I think the best ways to overcome it are to be very intentional with the use of these words in your marketing language. And number two, to align on a standard universal definition of what each of these mean in the context of the service that you provide, and make sure that the industry has access to that universal dictionary, if you will.
I like that. It's be intentional, align the standard, and what you also do is you prove a value. You go, look, have this for 30 days. Check this out. Look, go in and play with it, and that's where the real value is. And you suddenly realize, okay, this is true. This is true AI. That's really good insight, and I think a learning that for all technology companies and companies trying to push this out, and just the industry as a whole, because it's a struggle, and it's a shame when these buzzwords could prevent something positive happening and bringing more value to the industry. Okay. I'd love to tap into another one that I hear a lot as well, is and this is an interesting one, because it sort of took me back when I heard this one, but when I thought on it, I went, okay, I understand this. Is what if the root cause that we find is too costly or cannot be fixed, or cannot be fixed immediately? How do you overcome this with that sort of reply to bring in more visibility?
Yeah, so I think there are two parts to the question. I think, the root cause being expensive piece is one, but I think even before that, you have to make sure you get an accurate root cause. And right now, that's very difficult to do without additional AI-enabled contextualization around the data, right? So, for example, when you say root cause, I'm assuming you're probably referring to something like, why was it's not enough to share that, hey, this shipment was delayed, or hey, this shipment has a temperature excursion. You need to understand what caused that delay.
Yeah.
What caused that temperature excursion? Was it insufficient thermal life on the packaging? Was it a malfunctioning reefer? Was it an open truck door? Auto-diagnosing that and getting to an accurate root cause is a really, really, really long journey, unless you're going to do it manually for each and every single event, right? So I think that's the first half of the equation that you have to get over, or that you have to help your customers get through. They're going to rightfully so be skeptical if you can auto-diagnose root cause with limited manual intervention, right? So classification models and the ability to get those right, are pretty vital here. And then the second part of your question, so what can you do about it if the root cause is costly? I tend to think that it's better to know than not know, regardless of what the cost is. I think that at the end of the day, you have to do, each company has to do their own ROI model on what it's gonna cost to address it versus to let it ride. If the costs are too costly, then maybe you leave it. But if it's something that's recurring, twice a month, and it's costing your organization millions of dollars, I'd have to assume that at that point it's probably more expensive to not fix it. I think understand root cause is going to help you uncover the severity, right? Financially speaking, the frequency. the liability to some extent, accountability, where is it happening, who is responsible or who should be responsible. And I think, in those instances, if you have the answers to those questions, the solution doesn't necessarily always have to be, I am the sole person responsible for fixing this issue. It may be a shared burden, right? It may be something that's not caused by your organization at all. It may be something that's caused entirely by the 3PL or the carrier. It may be something that the customer is doing wrong on their receiving dock or through their process. So I think the ability to pinpoint where it's happening, when it's happening, who has custody, and then drive a shared resolution through the value chain with your partners, is something that you can't do without having root cause to begin with. So I think there's a net benefit to having root cause and having the optionality to fix it or to not fix it.
I like how you put that. It's making sure that we clarify exactly what that root cause is what you said. It might not even be that company that's using that technology that's impacting that cause. And I'm with you on that. It's surely it's better to know than not to know. I mean, being just blind to it just because we feel we may not be able to manage the cost or may not be able to fix it immediately due to whatever reasons, it's not really going to grow things forward and move things forward.
Well, and cost is subjective too, right? What may not be valuable to you may also be extremely valuable to your customer. What may cost you, $50,000 might cost your customer $2 million. So I think the ability to quantify the true cost all the way through the value chain, as well as any sort of, not just the wastage of the product, but cost of replacement, cost of inventory sitting there and not cost of delay from the sale, cost of lead time of replacement product. Like all of those things need to be a part of the equation. And then, I think the decision becomes much more clear.
Agreed. And moving on, I know we did touch on it. Having this level of visibility on the level of risk, and you're going to be able to rate your carriers and understand who is less risk. How do you feel this could impact the relationships and that worry about the impact this could have with the relationships with the carriers if they start rating them on some sort of out of 10 scale of whether they're going to go?
Yeah, that's a great question, Scott, and not to scare you off, but we're also rating the device companies as well as part of our platform. So we look at ping rate consistency, connectivity around the world, and so I think there are a number of stakeholders that go increasingly under the microscope, and obviously, again, this is intended to be an optimization and decision-making support tool for shippers. I think at the end of the day, whether you're talking about device companies or carriers and these ratings, I think you're going to have you're going to have two groups within the population. You're going to have groups that embrace it and that actually use this information and data to improve themselves and drive change and meaningful improvement. And you're going to have groups that reject it. I think in the short term, obviously, it has the potential to create some strain. And you can equate this to I don't know if you want to call it like the storming phase. Nobody wants their operations to be under a microscope. Nobody wants to shine a spotlight, on what's happening internally. I think that, sometimes we hear who should own visibility, right? Who should it be the enterprise? Should it be the shippers that own the product? Some of them come back to us and they say, well, I want the carrier to own this. I want the carrier to own the devices. I want the carrier to own the intelligence part, and I want them to provide it all for us. And I think, in some cases, it may make sense, but in a lot of cases, there needs to be a separation of power, right? Where there can be a conflict of interest if the carriers are owning 100% of the visibility and the intelligence, that they're not going to want to shine a spotlight on problem areas, right? So they can pick and choose what they show. And I think in most cases, it makes sense for the shippers to own this, to have the ability to have an unbiased view of what's happening, both from a device performance standpoint as well as a carrier performance standpoint. I think in the long term, this is going to be great for the industry. We see more and more carriers, shippers, device companies buying into this universe, like this ecosystem where everybody pitches in and it drives benefit for all, right? But I think to your point, on the flip side, you are going to have companies that push back on this in the short term. I think there's going to be a fairly apparent contrast between those that embrace it and those that push back on it. The ones that embrace it are going to improve. They're going to improve their own internal operations. They're going to offer better service. They're going to delight their customers, and more business is going to go to them. The ones that are not as eager to adopt this, I think are probably going to see negative business impact in the longer term. And that's going to drive then, I think, a secondary wave of adoption, where many of those are then going to say, okay, fine, we'll do this, right? Yeah. So I think, as with anything, you'll have the early adopters, you'll have the ones that resist it. You'll have the ones that kind of live in the middle and maybe test it, try it. But I think at the end of the day, this drives such a positive through the value chain for each stakeholder, whether it be the shipper, the customer, the 3PL, the carrier, that you can't ignore it for long, and you're going to have to embrace it too, and use the data to improve your own operations.
Absolutely, it's coming, and it very much is here, and it's going to drive the growth of the industry forward, and drive us to adopt and adapt to be the best carriers, be the best shippers. The final line I want on this segment I want to discuss is and there was a great panel actually on this. I think it was with Lucy from AstraZeneca. It might have been yourself, where we got into a bit of a recruitment conversation and a mindset conversation, especially with the amount of AI learning and machine learning being used. Little understanding of the vast company, little understanding of what this is and how it operates. There's going to be a real redesigning of roles, mindset shift to be able to now manage this mountains of data, and then take action on it. How are you combating that challenge? Because I know that's a long-term thing that's going to take over time. How do you feel we're going to see that change over time with this?
So for us, for our company, 30% of our company is data scientists and machine learning engineers. So we were fortunate in that we decided almost from day one that is our core competency. Where companies, I think, are going to have a tougher time with it. And obviously, there are a lot of benefits with making this your core competency, right? This is essentially what we live and breathe every single day. A lot of our collective work and vision centers around the ability to build accurate prediction models, risk quantification models, contextualization models. It's exciting work. So we're able to recruit great people to do this. When we look at, our peers in the industry that may have started out, building hardware as their core competency, or may have any other sort of core competency, it's more difficult to then later on incorporate data and have that be a part of your core, unless you're already at a sizable enough scale and you have enough capital behind you where you can make those kinds of investments. So I think it is difficult, both from a recruiting perspective and just a core competency perspective.
Mm-hmm.
But it's something, again, that you have to embrace, right? Because if you don't, you're going to be left behind. I think there's been a major evolution in visibility, even just over the last 2 or 3 years, where we started out just focusing with the dot on the map, right? And putting the dot on the map and getting real-time location and condition streaming data, fantastic, great, like, wow, mind-boggling. Everybody is super impressed. And now, 2-3 years later, I think, shippers kind of, they started asking themselves, they had assumed that once I deploy all of these dots on the map, my problems are virtually going to disappear overnight. No more delayed shipments, no more temperature excursions. And unfortunately, that's not always the case. I think there's this realization that, okay, now we have to surround this visibility initiative and program with labor. We have to bring on data people to interpret what this data is telling us. We have to bring on operations people to intervene, right? And a control tower to intervene with shipments that go rogue or that go bad. We have to bring on quality people to make sure that all this data is makes sense, right? And everything is in order. So you, at the end of the day, you have to bring on a full team around this, and data is an integral component of that. So I think you have to embrace it at this point.
I agree. It's a shift that's happening, and everyone in supply chain feels that pain of recruitment. It's a real pain, and it's one that's gonna continue for some time. And we need to move and we need to adapt. And I love that Paxafe has 20% data scientists. I mean, that's such a great line that you have. I mean, that is such. Just that line in itself just shows the value of Paxafe. And if people can work to really adopt, bring in the right resource into their companies to deal with this shift, like Paxafe has, that's really gonna really move this industry and company forward. Mm-hmm. So I want to now dive into, now we've gone through the resistance to technology, this sort of risk management technology. I want to now dive into a bit more about active risk management. I really want to know, what are some key challenges in perishable goods industries that passive risk management struggles with today versus active is answering for today? Just so if you can use some key examples of some big pain points of perishable good industries that active is answering for today.
Yeah, so I think for one, the immediate one that jumps to mind is intervention, right? So the ability to have your control tower, or whatever process you have in place to intervene with shipments that go bad during transit, to have a chance at salvaging the product. Now, I think one of the things that active can enable is a lot more of the advanced capability that isn't even mainstream yet, or isn't even universally available for all for their shippers, right? So I think first and foremost, not all risk is created equal. When you look at the sea of, if you're a shipper and you have 1,000 shipments out today, you might have excursions on 15% of them, right? That's 150 red dots that you're going to be looking at on your map. How do you auto prioritize those? I guess part of the answer today is you have a team that's sorting through and trying to determine, is this a real risk or not? Is this an important risk? Do I need to have somebody on this right this minute or not? And you have a team that's analyzing all this data in real time, and that's great. But one of the things that we are trying to help push towards is this auto prioritization, and understanding that not all of these red dots that have risk are created equal. For example, a product that may have 20% stability life remaining, right, on shelf life, right, the equivalent of shelf life remaining, but it's still 60% of the way from the destination, has a very, very, very different risk profile than a product that has 90% shelf life or stability budget remaining, and it's 10% away from the destination. That latter one may not require any intervention at all. It's a low risk. It's virtually, there's no risk to the product. The first one, on the flip side, is a high risk. There is a strong risk to the product. How can we sort through all of that data amongst all of these red dots and bring only those that are truly risky based on your organization's risk profile to the top? So then you don't have to have, 5 people sorting through all this information and doing this manually. I think that's one of the things that real time enables that passive obviously cannot do. I think another one is prediction. And prediction is obviously still very new to the industry. But we, for our customers, we offer 2 different prediction models. We offer a predictive time of arrival, and we can also predict temperature excursions before they occur. We can't do that without real-time data, right? Both of these models, as a part of their inputs, take in real-time sensor data. And it's not possible to do that solely based on historical data or passive data. Those are features that are highly valuable. That if you can tell your customer that this shipment is going to be late 24 hours before, so that they can orchestrate and synchronize their internal receiving labor in accordance with when that product is actually going to arrive, that's a huge win. Same thing with temperature excursions. If you can identify a temperature excursion hours before it actually happens, it's much cheaper to react to it or proactively address it than to react to it once it's already hours, pinging and out of spec. So I think these are all things that are enabled with real-time data that we can't do with passive.
I think that's a key one that you first mentioned, that it's because you're right. When you start lighting up your supply chain with that real-time sensing and seeing that risk that's happening, you can get lost within it. It can be a lot of dots, and having a system that can define what are the dots I need to focus on is so important, because otherwise we're just running around like a bull in a china shop trying to figure out which oh my god, like all of this is going wrong, but actually now there's reasons to why that's pinging, and it's actually these 3 you need to focus on right now. I think that's key to what you just said there.
That's absolutely right. Yeah, it's otherwise, what I was saying earlier, visibility teams, they have this unrealistic expectation from their visibility programs that once they implement the program, all of their problems are going to or a big portion of their problems are going to disappear, right? And that's not the case. It's not going to happen unless you bring on a team around this to, around the visibility program to address these issues. And in our case, we try to automate away as much of the quantification work, right? The risk quantification, the prediction capability, as we can, so that you can support, so that these teams can support it, maybe not with 15 people, but maybe with 5 people.
Yeah.
And it's a much, and those people can utilize the tool to make their lives easier, right? Looking at 150 dots on the map is not the most fun thing to do in the first place.
Yeah.
So they can utilize the tool to make their work more meaningful and more productive.
And of course, would you agree that we're moving forward further and further to try automate, like you were saying, that automate more and more to need less and less human involvement?
Yeah, I think that's a fair statement. I think, human involvement is always going to be necessary. I think the human involvement is going to evolve to, like I just said, more meaningful human involvement. So actually making decisions based off of the data, right? I think taking the boring part of diagnosing and quantifying and stacking the risk up against each other from shipment to shipment, those are all things that you typically have to follow stringent SOPs, and it's not the most exciting stuff. If you already have that information at your fingertips, the human now can make a decision on what action to take. And I think the work becomes much more meaningful, and it becomes different. I think it goes back to your original point on these jobs around visibility evolving. The humans become much more of the decision maker, and they can make a lot more decisions. The throughput increases, productivity increases. So I won't say that I think this 100% replaces human intervention, but I think that just the nature of the work changes.
Yeah, it's very much exciting to me, the involvement this happens, and the new things this brings out, and the moving forward of the industry and company. It's going to be very interesting to see, and it's fantastic to be at the forefront of that. I want to ask one final question. What does risk look like in the future in supply chain? Do we eradicate it? Is it just a lot less, or are we just better informed? What do you feel risk looks like in the far future?
That's a great question. I think if you wake up and you imagine your most perfect day where nothing goes wrong and no issues come up, and you just are able to be as productive as possible, that's what I envision. Is all of these, it's not that these issues will disappear and won't be there, it's that they will be to a great extent automated, and will enable the human to focus on the important work, right? And that is to make decisions. I think risk won't necessarily be eradicated. I think it will be quantified to where companies understand what risk is impacting their lanes. And not just, that's a very broad statement, but actually being able to break out lanes by routes, right? By legs of routes, by individual shipments within legs, and understand which features, which inputs are impacting different parts of their supply chain. So building hotspots around, on this leg, this is the greatest input that's contributing to my risk. Whereas on this leg, it's a completely different input. And on this leg, it's the same input, right? So what are the commonalities between these two legs? I think being able to answer those questions is the first step. Understanding deeply where your risk lies and how it's classified and what's contributing to it is the first step in being able to, automate it away. So I think that's part one. And then being able to generate recommendations on how to minimize that risk is the second component of that. So you've identified where the risk lives, what the hotspots are, what's contributing to that risk, what the so what factor, right? So now that I know what it is and how to quantify it, how do I eradicate it? That's not always obvious. I think there's a heavy amount of I mean, I hate to use the buzzword machine learning, but there is a pretty substantial amount of machine learning that has to go into looking at all of the different patterns, the correlations, to then help you auto-generate what recommendations should be on the table to minimize that risk. And then the human can take those recommendations, weigh each of them and make a decision on which one makes the most sense for their particular business. So I think in a perfect world, risk will be quantified, it will be known, and to a large extent, you'll have automated, auto-generated recommendations of how to address it. So that way, people can do what they do best, and be as productive as possible without having to continuously combat fires and chase things that don't necessarily require the most that aren't the most exciting things to do.
I mean, for me, that's a future I want. It's very much, in basic terms, very much taking out all that admin and just allowing us to make those top level decisions. There's A, B, C, and D. Which decision do we go with? that's a much more, we can focus our energy on being much more productive and what we're doing, so much better informed. And to be fair, if you've ever seen The Good Place, the TV show on Netflix, there's a bad place and a good place when you die. And in The Good Place, it's a perfect day every day. There's no risk. It's just a perfect day every day. And they actually become like very numb to happiness. So maybe we always need a bit of risk and a bit of pain in our lives.
I was trying to think of a movie or a show that I could equate it to that was very utopian. I don't remember, maybe The Truman Show.
The Truman, yeah.
something of the sort, but nothing popped into my head. I think if you've read the book, I don't know if you had to read the book The Giver when you were younger. I think it was The Giver that they grew up in a utopia, right, where everything was everything was perfect, right?
Yeah.
And I'm not necessarily saying that that's what the ideal state of risk is, but I think just this world where you don't have to continuously combat fires and chase down things, and you can really focus on the meaningful aspects of your work, I think is the desirable end state. Absolutely.
Well, thank you very much, Ilya. It's great to hear your knowledge on this and see what Paxafe are doing. You're doing some really fantastic things, and it's really interesting to hear your 2 cents on this. And I feel it's very interesting to the industry to understand this, and technology companies out there to really get more clarification on how they can fight these battles out there.
Thanks for having me, Scott. This was a great experience.
I appreciate it. If we just do a little wave to the camera, we'll do a little wave to the camera.
Probably do it with my other hand.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah, you don't want
nursing this shoulder.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Ilya, and thank you very much for watching.
Thank you, Scott.
Hi, my name is Scott Mears, and I'm one of the hosts of the Supply Chain Tech podcast with Roamby. On this podcast, we talk to supply chain heroes from around the world about everything, ranging from the disruptions related to supply chains, their personal experiences with tracking technologies, strategies to build resilience, and much, much more. We already have some recommended videos for you to the side of me, and if any of this sounds interesting to you, do subscribe to our YouTube channel and hit the bell icon so you don't miss another Roamby video. I'll see you next time.